Okay, a little bit of practical halacha. We're going back to the halachas of Birkat Hamazon, of benching. So the first class that we had, we got through whatever we got through. I would tell you what it is, but I can't remember myself. So I don't expect you people to remember if you can't. If I can't remember, so we could probably do it again, right? No, okay. When you bench, you're supposed to bench sitting down. If you bench whilst you're moving around, whilst you're standing up, so you fulfill your obligation, but what's called Bidi Bidi. Right? There are two different ways of doing mitzvot. One is lechatchila, and one is Bidi Bidi. Lechatchila means that you do it in the best possible way, and you fulfill, all the dictates, all the details, everything's done properly. Bidi Bidi means that you haven't done it 100% correctly, but I guess de facto, it's going to be okay, right? So, for example, over here, you're supposed to sit down when you bench, but if you bench standing up, so de facto, you have fulfilled your obligation to bench. The reason for sitting down is simply because when people sit down, they have more kavanah, they have more concentration, they're more aware of what it is that they're saying. When we, I'm sure everybody here knows that when you daven, when you pray and you're walking around and doing all kinds of other things as well at the same time. So we all know that our concentration is vastly reduced. So that's a way that you're supposed to do it. If somebody is benching for somebody else, so let's say you sat down and you had a meal together, and the other person that you ate with, they don't know how to bench by themselves, so they're asking you to bench for them. So they also need to sit down, right? Which means that if you're fulfilling his obligation, so he needs to be doing what you need to be doing. You both need to be sitting down in order to be able to fulfill the obligation of benching. Interestingly enough, if a person needs to, I think somebody mentioned this the other day, right? If somebody is benching but they need to get to somewhere, and that means that they've got to get up and walk off to wherever it is that they're going to. So it's mutter to do that. Interestingly enough, lechatchila, if the person ate whilst he was walking, then it's permissible to bench whilst you're walking as well. An interesting little halacha.
Eating bread on the street.
Whatever, yeah, it's interesting because we're taught that we're not supposed to eat whilst we're in the streets. It's actually a halacha. It's in the Shulchan Aruch. You're not supposed to really be eating whilst you're walking around in the streets. It denotes, certainly in the times of the Shulchan Aruch, it denoted a certain kind of a brazenness, a certain kind of a lack of humility. But it's interesting that over here the halacha says that if you're walking whilst you're eating, then you can bench whilst you're walking as well. What about if you're eating in a car, eating on the bus, eating in the train? So long as you sit in your seat, then that's okay, even though you're not in the same place anymore, because the thing is constantly moving unless you're in the car. Space. What about space? Floating. I'm not 100% sure how you're going to eat anything whilst you're floating in space, because you've got to lift up your visor, right, to get the got to get your helmet off to get your to get the food in your mouth. At that point, you'll die. But
you rolling about?
I don't know. Definitely something that should leave you awake at nights, trying to fathom the depth of what happens when somebody eats when they're in outer space. But in the meantime, over in places that do have gravity, which is not this classroom, it's lacking gravitas altogether. But if places that do have gravity, so if you're sitting on a train, the train's in a constant state of movement. So you might say to yourself, I need to bench wherever I ate. That's where I need to bench. Right, and you ate back in the previous station, and now it's moved on to wherever it's gone to, but you can't go back.
You could get off and get on the other train.
It's probably simpler just not to eat, I think, actually.
Yeah.
But, so you can bench sitting down in your chair, whatever it is that you're traveling in. We spoke the other day. We spoke about the idea that the first three brachot that are recited inside of Birkat Hamazon are Dioraisas. They come from the Torah's obligation to recite them. They were introduced, the first one was introduced by Moshe Rabbeinu. The second one was introduced by Yoshua bin Nun. And the third one was introduced by David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech. Right, so those three are considered to be biblical obligations in order to say them. And the last one was introduced by Ezra HaSofer. So we're talking now about the post-destruction of the first temple around the time of the building of the second temple. As we mentioned, as far as we're concerned, it doesn't make any difference. We've got to recite them properly. We've got to recite them all.
The second one by the second blessing.
Second was by the first one was by Moshe. The second one was by Joshua.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Joshua, of course, was the person who took over from Moshe Rabbeinu, and that's why the second blessing refers to going into the land of Israel. Joshua was the one that took the Jewish people into the land of Israel. So that's his, that's like his motif, right? We mentioned that when you come to recite the third bracha, so you answer amen to your own bracha, which is something which is pretty unique. We don't normally do that. And the reason for that is just to point out to ourselves, to let ourselves know that we're moving from the D'Oraisa, from the Torah obligations into the rabbinical obligations. And the custom is to wait momentarily before you say the word amen, right? Just to pause for a moment before you said it. There are some interesting halachas over here, some interesting laws over here about benching. When you come to bench, if you've got a tablecloth on the table, which when you ate your meal, if there was a tablecloth on the table, you should leave the tablecloth on the table when you come to bench, and preferably, if possible, you should leave some bread on the table as well. Well, crumbs will do if that's all there is.
Like a certain amount of bread.
No, interestingly enough, right? It's interesting, right?
Because when you eat before, it has to be like a certain
yeah,
amount,
it's very interesting. Judaism's a very exact religion, and it tells you exactly how much you need to eat and how much you need to have eaten in order to be able to make a first bracha and an after bracha. And yet over here, there's no minimal amount that needs to be left on the table. It's there. If you don't have a piece of bread, then the crumbs, they'll do. Try not to brush off the crumbs until after you've finished benching. The reason for that is because the idea of the bracha of the Birkat HaMazon being able to rest on something. There's a concept inside of Judaism which is something which is very basic. It's something very beautiful, which is called a kli kibbul. In order for a blessing to be able to come to fruition, there needs to be some kind of a vehicle to allow that to happen over here in the physical world. So when we come and we talk to God, we thank God for having given us food and v'achalta v'savata, we've eaten, we're satisfied. That sense of satisfaction in Mitzvah Hashem is going to carry on. It's not just for this meal, but we'll be satisfied with other meals that we eat as well. That means that the bracha needs to rest upon something which is going to be able to hold that bracha. Bread is the vehicle which is going to allow the bracha to come to fruition. If you don't have anything on the table at all, there's no bread left on the table and there's no crumbs left on the table, so you could even go and bring a new loaf of bread and put it on the table before you start benching in order to have that bracha rest upon it. If there are crumbs on the table, you don't have to do that because the crumbs are going to be enough. There is an interesting halacha that during the week, if you have a knife left on the table, so you should cover the knife up. Might put it under the tablecloth. If you've got plastic or something, just cover it up with something. The reason for that, believe it or not, is that when we come to talk about the temple, that will be so overwhelmed with pain that the temple hasn't been destroyed, that the temple hasn't been rebuilt, that it was destroyed, that a person may come to harm himself with a knife that's on the table. Over here in the yeshiva, I'm not convinced that it's such a big issue because the knives don't cut anything anyway. So, you might be able to keep them on. Whatever, there is a custom on Shabbos. Some people have the custom not to cover up the knives because on Shabbos we've got a different frame of mind. So it's going to be okay. Some people, you may have seen this in people's houses. Some people have the custom to cover up the bread that's left on the table. They'll just put like a napkin on top of it just to cover it up. The reason for that is if you're benching over a cup of wine. So yes, I think the couple of days ago we spoke about the idea that if you've got a minyan, then the custom is to bench over a cup of wine. Some people have the custom to bench over a cup of wine when there's just a zimmer, when there are 3 people. So again, whatever is done, it's fine. The Aruch HaShulchan, which is a very classic halachic authority, he writes that even a person benching by himself should bench over a cup of wine. That's not the accepted norm. I don't know anyone that does that, but I do know people that when there are 3 people, a minimum of 3 people, so they do use a cup of wine. When there's a minyan, that it's very accepted when there's a minyan to bench over a cup of wine. So the question is, do you need to cover up the bread that's sitting on the table or not? You cover up the bread on Friday night and Shabbat morning. The bread is covered up because Kiddush is being made first. And under normal circumstances, we normally make the bracha over bread and then we make the bracha over wine during the meal. On Shabbos and on Yom Tov, what do? We do it the other way around. We make Kiddush first in order not to embarrass, in inverted commas, in order not to embarrass the bread, the challah that's there, because we're making the bracha over the wine first. We cover the bread up. A question now: if you're going to bench over a cup of wine, should you cover up the pieces of bread that are left in order that there shouldn't be any, in order that there shouldn't be any kind of embarrassment? The prevalent custom is not to do it. But again, if you go around to somebody's home and you see that that's what they do, then you'll know that's why they're doing it.
But you don't have to copy.
You don't have to do it. No, the accepted custom is not to do that. The accepted custom is to leave the bread uncovered and to bench anyway, even if you're benching over a cup of wine. Yes, good. No, maybe.
So during the week, the bread can stay there, even though you're going to cover the knife.
Yeah. During the week, when you're not going to be benching over a cup of wine, so you can leave the bread uncovered, but you're covering up the knife for a different reason, right? You're covering up the knife because of your intense anguish at the fact that the temple hasn't been rebuilt, and the fear that maybe somebody will do something to themselves.
Why is it negative?
I don't know. Maybe it's just the truth is, I guess we're supposed to feel like that, aren't we?
Well, I figure that the knife may represent the part of the knife for shech, the karbanos, why is it?
Yeah, it's possible. We use the knives. We use the knives for very positive things, right? On the table, we use the nice sharp knife we use to cut the challah with. That we use it to cut the bread with. We use knives to cut our food with. I don't know.
Do you have to use a knife to cut the challah, or can you use the break?
So it's interesting. You are supposed, before you make the bracha over the hamotzi, you are supposed to cut the challah that you're going to be using first, right? Give it a mark. So you need a knife to be able to do that. Afterwards, according to some opinions, if you pull the challah apart, right, which is challah, braided challah for sure is created in such a way that it's very tempting to do that. They're like it's like a handful's worth of challah, and you could just pull it off and start hanging it. Yeah. So according to some opinions, it's lacking respect. It's a lack of derech eretz to pull the bread apart and hand it out to people. So the correct thing would be to cut the challah first, and then afterwards, if people want to pull off, more challah for themselves, I guess they can do that. There are challahs every now and then. My wife and my daughters make challahs that are flower shaped, which have got a piece in the middle and then balls going around it. And it all bakes together and it becomes like one thing, and it's very pretty. And those are very easy to just pull off and hand around to people. But again, it's better to cut it. Yeah.
This is a bit of a side note, but why is it? Because on last Shabbat, why is it that if you have say a challah roll or roll in front of you, like an individual one, and you make a bracha over the big one, why do some people eat from the little one and other people wait for the big one to come around?
Oh, okay.
The one that's been blessed, basically, with the salt and everything. So
Yeah.
you've got a little roll in front of you, but the
Yeah.
guy who's made the bracha...
So really, if the person who's making a bracha for everybody, right, like he's got the big challah over there,
But you've
right?
got a little one each.
And you've got a little one each. But if he's making the hamotzi for everybody there at the table, then everybody should really be having some of his challah,
Okay.
right?
He's blessing the whole table, including the challahs on...
Well, not really. I mean, what is happening is you'll see that he lifts up the challahs that he's got in front of him.
Yeah.
There is actually a custom when you make hamotzi that you should pick up. Your all 10 fingers should be touching the chalot that you're making the bracha over, right? And he's
Make
really
the bracha, then how can you make the then?
you do that beforehand, which means that you first you score. You just make a line with the knife on the challah, and then you pick them up and you make the bracha over them. So that's really, if he's making that for everybody, then that's that's part of the challah that everybody should be getting a little bit of his challah before they start tucking into their own. Hold on a second, if you don't want to wait, or you don't want to be a part of his bracha for whatever the reason, so you can borrow your neighbor's roll. You need to have two, right? So you can borrow your neighbor's roll, and you can make hamotzi over your challah, and you can eat it, and you don't have to wait for his to come around.
Okay. I'm just saying if you're on the other side of the table and you can't talk for about 10 minutes.
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, no one else will be complaining. It could be very difficult.
Necessarily to have salt.
Yes, it is. It's not just on Shabbos. The custom is to eat salt, to dip bread into salt every time that you eat bread. The reason for that is because salt is representative of what took place on the altar, right? All the altars, all the things that were offered up on the altar were offered up together with salt. Interestingly enough, even the wood offering, which was offered up I think, if my memory serves me correct, twice a year in the temple, was sprinkled with salt as well, right? And salt, your table is considered to be a mizbeach, is considered to be an altar. Therefore, when you have your challah, you should dip it into salt, because it's like you're making a korban, you're making an offering over here, and it's something that you should do all week round. It's not just something which is reserved for Shabbos.
Sometimes you forget during the week. Shabbos, it's automatic. Sometimes
Yeah. Okay. We're all guilty. We're all guilty of that one, I think.
Funny that you don't concentrate so much during the week as you would concentrate.
I think the pshat is very simple, actually. I think it's because on Shabbos there's normally a special thing that's been set aside for the salt, and it gets put on the table, and it's a part of the whole ceremony of making hamotzi. During the week, like you say, it's not there. We forget. But you really should use salt. Yeah.
So, since the temple is gone, do we take a lot of things like for Shabbat from what we did in the temple, like the salt, like you said? Is there what
there are other things.
We have synagogues now because we don't have a temple.
Well, davening is taking the place of the sacrifices. Right, so shacharit is taking the place of the morning sacrifices. Mincha is taking the place of the afternoon sacrifices.
Surely there were synagogues during temple times, no?
There were. It was very, very different from how things are today. There was gathering. There were gathering places where people came together in order to pray. But during the first temple period, prayer didn't have any resemblance to the prayer that we have today. So today, prayer is pretty universal. You open up a siddur, and everyone, whatever you're davening, everyone's davening mincha. So you're pretty much davening the same thing together. In the olden days, back in the time of only in the first temple period, prayer was something which was very unique. It was something that was very personal as well, which means you were just overcome with a desire to communicate with God, and you would pray, not using. There were very, very few formalized prayers that were in place at the time.
Everything of it is now a result of.
It's all the result of the destruction of the temple, because what was happening was, as they got towards the end of the first temple period, people were less and less spiritual. They had less and less of a desire to pray to God. So the men of the Great Assembly came along and they said, "No, your people are making a mistake. It's not something which you can choose to do. You have to pray." So here, we're going to lay down the prayer. We're going to give you the text. And now you can just work on how you say it. Yeah.
Back to the salt issue, we were saying about how we seem to remember it in the week sometimes, and you do on Shabbos. It's a bit like why you keep your best clothes for Shabbos, because with the salt you have why you remember it is because it's part of the layout of the table. You always have some people have embroidered salt and pepper mixed in, a bit like the cup and everything. It's all sort of, it's the best of the week, therefore you're more likely to remember it.
Yeah,
make an effort to bring out your best thing. Same with the clothes, same with the wine, same with the food, quality of the food and stuff, so it's sort of your best of the week.
Yeah, it's true. My mother-in-law for 40 years had an everyday salt container. Like something one of her kids had made out of clay. It was rather an odd looking thing actually, and it was there. It was always on the table. So when people came to eat, it was always there. That was what she had during the week. On Shabbos, she had something fancier, and she had it until not very long ago. Actually, and then one of her grandchildren actually broke it. So so now she's salt containerless, unfortunately. Oh, okay, interesting. So we dip from Rosh Hashanah until the end of Sukkot. We dip in honey. We don't dip in salt. However, there is a custom amongst the descendants and the followers of somebody called the Chatam Sofer, the Chatam Sofer, that the Chatam Sofer said that you should dip salt and honey. He didn't understand, but dipping in honey, of course, it's a symbol that you should have a sweet year and it should be nice. But the obligation to use salt, said the Chatam Sofer, is something which it goes across the board.
Sweet and salt, like the chocolate bamba.
Yeah, I've never tasted it, but it sounds like a rather bizarre combination to me. But most people do is that they don't use salt during the period between Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot. They just use honey. And interestingly enough, there's one night in the year when salt is not used, and that's on Seder night. So that when you come to eat the matzot on Seder night, there's no inyan of using salt, right? Salt is not used on the matzah.
You wouldn't anyway, because in temple times they didn't have. I mean, not in leaving Israel and leaving Egypt, you had barely time to make the matzah, let alone add stuff onto it.
Yeah.
Like, let's skip the salt out and just.
Yeah, so on Seder night we don't use salt either. But aside from that, you're supposed to have salt during the year, during the week. You're supposed to have salt when you come and eat your bread.
You're not allowed to have honey with the challah other than on Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot.
No, you know what? After you've dipped your challah in the salt, if you want to carry on, if you want to have some honey on your challah, you can do that. Huh?
It's not bad with honey.
It's not bad, especially with lots of butter. It's definitely doable, for sure. There's just an interesting thing over here. You mentioned this idea of everyone having little challah rolls and no, there's an interesting halacha that, sometimes, you've been to weddings, you sometimes have these enormous challahs. They're like, this big.
Yeah. Someone makes does the blessing for everyone.
Yeah. Normally, I don't know, over here in Israel, the custom is that the chatan makes a blessing, the groom makes a blessing for everybody over this great big enormous challah. The halacha is that the thing that you're making the blessing over should be whole. That's the preference, which means if you've got a giant challah like this, which has got a big crack down the middle because whoever brought it along when they didn't hold it properly and it just it sagged and a great big crack appeared in the middle, then it's better to make hamoitzi over the little roll, which is whole, rather than over the big challah. There's a concept in the halacha, something called shleimus, perfection. And we're looking for perfection inside of our mitzvah observance. We're looking for perfection. That's what we're pitching for, right? And it's got more to do with quality than quantity. It's not that the bigger something is, the better it is, but rather the more complete something is, the better it's going to be. Right? So I think it's just like a general idea that we need to take with us, Mitzvah Hashem, when we perform mitzvahs. This idea of being careful in the way that we do them and trying to get the quality down pat And then afterwards we can worry about the quantity. Once a person's familiar with what they're doing and they're comfortable with what they're doing, then they can build on it and they can turn it into something bigger than it was, yeah.
Obviously, as you say, Halacha is very intricate. For people that have grown up in families where they haven't been used to the complexities of Halacha, but they want to keep it, I mean, do they have to go about each one? I mean, obviously, it's easy to forget things. You could think that you're doing very well, and you even people who've gone to yeshiva for years and studied and stuff, but you can feel it, and then you get to one Shabbat, and then you just have lapses because you haven't been brought up.
Yeah.
It's like with anything, like learning a language.
Yeah.
There's the intricacies of it.
What does it mean? It means like this. First of all, for people who are just beginning their journey, so for sure, things can be they can be very complex, and they can be very, very involved. And, possibly a person might say, look, you know what, I'm happy to keep Shabbos, right? But you know what, I'm not going to keep it with all these bits and pieces and all these little details. I've got no idea what they are. It's too complicated for me. Right? Is that okay? For sure it's okay, right? The more we do, the better it is, right? Are you doing something perfectly? No, probably not, right? That's okay. First of all, a person needs to get used to what it is that they're doing, be happy and be comfortable with what they're doing. And afterwards, you build. So you add a little bit more. Once a person's comfortable with this, they'll move on to the next part and they'll say, okay, here, this part of Shabbos, I never knew about this. Here, let's start doing this now, right? Many people that I've met over the years, for example, have come to full Shabbos observance by beginning by lighting candles on Shabbos. That's all they did, nothing else. Right? But by beginning to light candles on Shabbos, so that draws them onto the next mitzvah, and it draws them onto the next one, and slowly but surely they build it up until they're comfortable enough to be able to do it properly. What happens when you've been doing it properly for a while and you forget? Here, 6 days a week you walk into the room, the first thing you do is you put on the light. Right? On Shabbos, you're not supposed to do that. So, for a couple of years already, you've been keeping Shabbos properly, you hadn't been putting on the lights, and then one Shabbos you walk in, you have a momentary lapse, and it's like an automatic thing, you just flick the light switch. What now? So the answer is, what now? So from now on, I've got to be a little bit more careful.
Well, you remember
right?
now.
You'll remember, right? There's some places you can get a hold of cute little things that cover up light switches. So you can't put them on, or if you want to switch them on, you've got to take it off to be able to use it. So, it's good. It's fine. It's like it's a visual reminder. It's a physical reminder as well, right? All of these things, in Mitzvah Hashem, the more something becomes ingrained. Oh, so it's interesting. Inside of Halacha, there are three different levels of doing things, right? There's doing the right thing. So you've got somebody who doesn't put on the light, and then you've got doing something b'shoigeg. What does b'shoigeg mean? That a person does something inadvertently. So you forgot, you walked into the room, momentarily forgot that it's Shabbos, and you switch on the light. There's something called an oines. What is an oines? An oines is when the person didn't even know that it was forbidden to begin with. So let's say, for example, you've got a person he doesn't know that he's not allowed to put on the lights on Shabbos. And he puts on the lights on Shabbos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's not going to hold him accountable for something that he doesn't know. God might hold him accountable for never having learnt about it to begin with. That's a different thing, right?
Yeah.
But not knowing something, God's not going to say to the person, I don't understand. You switched on the lights every Shabbos that you were alive here in this world. Why did you do that? And the fellow's going to say, but I never knew I wasn't allowed to. What do you want from me? Right? That's an oines. If somebody is an oines, if somebody is completely and absolutely not responsible for his action. Then there's shoigeg, which means that what? He knew that it was Shabbos and he forgot. So for that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, again, how's he going to judge the person? He's going to judge the person less on the action that he did and more on the fact that he should have been more careful. Which means that when we inadvertently do things, we forget momentarily. The real critique over here is that the person forgot momentarily. How come you forgot? That's what God is going to say. And then the final level, which is the worst level, is when somebody knows that it's forbidden to put on the lights on Shabbos, and he says, I'm going to do it anyway, I don't care.
Oh, that's it. He's not.
That's what's called a mazid. That person is doing something on purpose. He's aware of what it is. He knows what he knows what the repercussions are, right? We're not going to talk about people like that because that's not us, right?
Rabbi, can you make, let's say you have no wine,
Yeah.
and you only have, it's a two-way question actually, and you only have one large challah, no lechem mishnah, you don't have a second. Now that, what happens with that? Do you make the kiddush? Do you make the amoitzi?
If you've got first of all, if you've got a sliced bread somewhere or a slice of bread,
Use it as
right?
a second.
You can bring that out, but the eved, that can be your lechem mishnah, even though it's not the way that it's supposed to be. If you've got a whole sliced loaf of bread, that's even better, even though it's not whole. But it's, I'm running into, I keep using the word whole, but that's not what I meant, right? Even though it's not a whole loaf of bread because it's now been cut up into pieces, nevertheless, that's preferable to using just one slice. But what do you do if you don't have any wine? You make kiddush over the bread. So how does that work? What do? You wash your hands, you make al netilat yadayim, and then the person who's making kiddush recites the kiddush as usual, right? All the same words as usual, except that when he gets to the bracha of Bari Pri HaGefen, he says, Hamoitzi lechem min haaretz. And then everybody fulfills their obligation through kiddush, through using the challahs instead. Yeah.
Back to this this third level. If you're somebody who knows that it's wrong, but was brought up in a household that does it anyway, therefore, I don't know, maybe either their Yetzer Hara is stronger, or they're just they don't know maybe they know from other people because they've stayed from Shabbos,
Yeah.
it's all right. Yet they themselves haven't found the justification of doing it and have lived their life without it. Does God judge them differently, or is there?
Yes, no, for sure. The idea of doing something deliberately is we're not talking about the situation of somebody who's vaguely aware of what they're supposed to do, what they're not supposed to do. We're not even talking about somebody who knows that they're supposed to switch. They know they're not supposed to switch on the lights, but they've been brought up in an environment where that's not adhered to. We're talking about somebody who knows very well, he's learnt about it, he knows what the halacha is, he knows the repercussions of the halacha, and he says, I'm not doing it. Now, that's different, very different, from somebody who says, you know what, I learnt about this halacha of not switching on lights on Shabbos, I know all about it, but I'm not ready to do it right now. That's two different things, very, very different. Which means a person who is perfectly capable of doing it and he's perfectly aware of what he's supposed to do and he's not going to do it anyway, that's what's called amazing. He's doing it deliberately, and that's not, when he gets upstairs at the age of 120, it's not going to be pretty, that's for sure, right? But the guy who's coming along and saying, look, I know what the halacha is, right? I've learned the halacha, but right now I'm not ready to be able to do that. The whole time that person is truly not ready to do it, then God is not going to he's not going to hold them accountable. So what's the problem with it? The problem is that it's very, very subjective. Very subjective, right?
25, you should be ready to do it.
So here, I'm going to tell you something a little bit scary, but that's okay because I don't think you're listening anyway, right? Right. That's the first time you've agreed with me today. Something a little bit scary. Let's say you've got a fellow, he's learning about the halachas of Shabbos, and he's being taught about not using the lights on Shabbos, but he's not ready for it. So the whole time that he's not ready to do that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not holding him accountable for the times that he puts on the lights. But the minute he is ready to do it, and he hides behind the excuse of not being ready, then retroactively HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to zap him for everything.
How about a guy that steals? He can say, I know it says low signal, but I'm not ready yet to be.
The Rambam says there are certain mitzvahs which are what are called mitzvot sichliot. They're logical mitzvahs. If a mitzvah is a mitzvah sichli, right? For example, don't steal, than getting upstairs at the age of 120 and telling God, listen, I was almost there. I was almost ready to do it, but you know what? I couldn't because I wasn't. I just wasn't ready. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. That sounded like it was going to. Right? It sounded like something was going to come after that, but it just stopped.
Just from general observations of other people and stuff.
It's a very observant Jew.
It does seem that it's very difficult to know where that point is. It's very difficult also to know that someone who knows that it's right deep down, but is just for whatever reason, whether it's background, whether it's their current situation, where they're living with.
No, for sure.
It's just extremely difficult.
For sure.
In this environment where it's all easily done for them.
You
are
just
walk into a room.
100% right.
You have to do it all yourself.
And that's why, for sure, God is looking. First of all, God looks at every single individual according to who he is, and according to where he is, and what he is, and why he is. Everything is taken into account. So, for example, you can have somebody who comes to yeshiva, and whilst he's in yeshiva, he keeps Shabbos. Right? Why? Because it's relatively easy to do that. Like, what's the big deal? The lights are on a time switch anyway, and the meals are all taken care of, and so fine. So the shul is 30 seconds away from your room, right? And good. How complicated is it going to be to keep Shabbos? No, it's okay. It's doable.
It's a great Shabbos to keep it.
Maybe, right? Maybe.
The only thing is you couldn't bring your bed to the shul.
That's okay. I think people seem to manage. They seem to manage just fine. But a person comes to yeshiva and they're here for a month, let's say, and for the month that they're here, they keep Shabbos, and then they go home, and whatever home is, but home is not a yeshiva environment, right? And it's very, very different to that, and the resolve begins to lessen a little bit. So of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's taking all to it. It's not that once you've started doing something, then if you don't continue, then that's it. You're going to be zapped for the rest of your life. It doesn't work like that, right? I would say quite the opposite. I would say that keeping Shabbat in one form or another is great, and it's like planting a seed, which means I may go home, and home may not be a conducive environment for me to keep Shabbat. But when I move into a different environment, maybe I go off and rent something for myself, or I get married and I establish my own home, then I can start implementing some of the things that I experienced when I was back in yeshiva.
It's an interesting idea,
right? And they're there. It's just a seed that's been planted, and in Mitzvah Hashem, at some point it will grow and it will become something else.
It happens quite often.
Say there's an intervening period between the time that you've kept Shabbat on a trip or on an extended stay in somewhere, and the time now before maybe you have your own place and your own family. There's it could be quite a few years in that period.
Yeah.
Are you then surely you're already aware of everything?
Yeah. So I think if you ask me, I don't see this being different to what we spoke about before. I really don't. Yeah. Which means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows perfectly well that whether your inability to keep Shabbos is real or whether it's not. And if it's real, even if years are placed in between the two, it doesn't matter. For that entire period, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to say, you know what, fine, you can't be held accountable for something which was not applicable to you at that point in your life. Now, it could be, right? Let's say, for example, a person gets married and establishes his own home, and then he doesn't keep Shabbos.
Yeah.
Then at that point, maybe God is going to say, I don't understand. The whole time you were living at home, I understood why you weren't doing it, but now you're not living at home anymore. How come you had no resolve?
Yeah.
And
they're there.
Then it's going to be a problem, for sure.
When you're in your own home, your own family, that's
you define what your home is going to look like.
Contradiction for a lot of people that I know at this period of time, that they're a bit more religious than their families, because they've been on trips and they've been to yeshiva and stuff. Their parents are not so religious, so you're commanded to not commanded, but it's good to spend Shabbos and weekends with your family. That may necessarily not be parallel with keeping Shabbat.
Yeah.
So you've got an issue here. Do you go away every weekend from your family?
I don't know. I think it's got to be. I think it's got to be worked out. And it probably needs to be worked out with somebody who knows both the person and the family. And sometimes, you know what, you can come some kind of an understanding that sometimes I'll go away for Shabbos and sometimes I will stay home. And if I stay home, I'll do my best to keep what I can,
Yeah.
right? Knowing that I may not be successful, in the way that I'm successful when I go out to somebody else, but that's okay.
But you'll be judged when you've got your own family.
Yeah,
own-
I think so.
own
I think
place, yeah.
that to me that makes
That seems
perfect
fair,
sense,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Some families have those lights which you can turn, which are always on. But you
Yeah.
So I don't know if you heard about the Shabbos app, where you could.
What does it do?
I think so. Like, let's use your phone.
Yeah, it's use your phone. You're able to text, but it's something about not changing the power. Anyway, apparently it's kosher. But I was just thinking, like things like that. Yeah, it's not. Is it in the spirit of Shabbos? And if it's
No.
okay,
Absolutely.
then
Here, so let's
does
have a look
God
and
judge
see.
you for that? I mean, because
Talking about that you can turn it.
Here, the challah.
stuff like that.
Here, so let's have a look at the
especially
two, because
Shabbos
the two of them, I think the two of them are really not analogous. They're really
Yeah,
not,
you can text on your phone.
right? I really think they're not analogous. The two of them. That you've got the kosher lamp,
Yeah.
which is on the whole time, and it's just got a little thing around it that swivels around,
Yeah.
That's really cool.
and when there's a hole, you get light, and if you want less light, you just turn it around a bit. You don't want any light, you turn it around completely, and it cuts out. You're not doing anything over here. You're not doing anything which is contrary either to the halachas of Shabbos or to the spirit of Shabbos either. Quite the opposite. If anything, a Shabbos lamp is giving you a certain sense of comfort, right? You leave it by your bed. It means that you can read a little bit before you go to sleep. You've got enough light to be able to get yourself ready for bed. And then you can just turn it around and go to sleep. Which I think is, it's absolutely fine, and it fits in with the whole concept of the spirit of Shabbos. Look, I don't hold on a second. I don't know enough about apps to tell you whether the halachic dimensions of apps. I don't know enough about them to tell you whether this Shabbos app is real or whether it's not. But the one thing I can tell you for sure is that it does not fit in with what's called the ruach, with the spirit of Shabbos. Right, so for example, can you put your television on a time switch? Big game coming up, Shabbos afternoon, FA Cup, right? Your favorite team is playing. Of course they're going to lose, it doesn't matter, right? But you want to know by how much they're going to lose by, right? Is it okay to put your TV on the Shabbos switch? So I'll tell you like this, very simple. Are you transgressing a law of Shabbos by putting the TV on a Shabbos switch? No, you're not. But are you transgressing the spirit of Shabbos? For sure you are. Right? Hold on a second. We're taught that the way that we behave on Shabbos should be different from the way that we behave during the week, which means that on Shabbos we shouldn't be watching television, even using a time switch. We shouldn't be listening to the radio, even using a time switch, and we shouldn't be texting, even if the app really works. I've got no idea, right?
Something about changing the power. I don't know.
Even if it works, I've got no idea, but you shouldn't be texting either, because that's not the ruach, that's not the spirit of Shabbos.
I have a brother-in-law that's very that. So, Erev Shabbos, he covers the telephone, he covers the TV,
That's great. I tell you, I cover a couple of the phones in my house. I cover them. The reason why is because when I got engaged, one of my friends bought me a velvet telephone cover, and I've used it ever since. And it's cute, It's like we don't use the telephone on Shabbos. It's so ingrained that even if the phone rings, it's just like no one's going to pick up the phone by mistake. They're really not. But we put it on because it's nice. It's like something just added to it just adds something to the flavor of Shabbos, right? It's different. Shabbos is different. It's supposed to be different.
So that's why I'm not so sure about the light, that you make it darker. The ruach it's not there. I mean, so we kind of lenient on, So
I don't know what over here. I see. I mean, maybe. Listen, I would say like this: if anybody feels that it's detracting from the flavor of Shabbos by using a kosher lamp, then don't use it. For sure, right? But if you honestly feel that it's no problem at all, then you can feel comfortable using it because you're really not doing anything. So it's interesting. I think there are certain things that the ruach of Shabbos, the spirit of Shabbos, it's clear they shouldn't be used.
Yeah.
But other things, you know what? You can use your own judgment.
Yeah. It's just a couple of examples of this where you're not breaking a rule but you're breaking the ruach. So there's the idea that if you were to, for example, I don't know, that there was a football match on in the Shabbos afternoon, and you would go, and you live maybe like in town or something in London, and you would go into like a pub, but you would the TVs would already be on, and you'd already have had to pay the tab from the week, and therefore you're not actually you're not transferring money, B, you're not turning a TV on,
Yeah.
you're still.
So I'll tell you something interesting.
Shabbos.
Over there, there is another dimension, a halachic dimension, which is a problem, as something called maris ayin. Marit ayin is when you're doing something which is perfectly okay, but it looks wrong.
To other people.
Which means that somebody sees you going into the pub. What?
And it's very public.
Yeah.
What does it matter? Yeah, but the same issue
Somebody-
applies to walk into your room, in your living room with the TV already on.
Oh, so in
That's
your
private.
own home, you know what? I'll tell you something interesting. Actually, in your own home, if you've got guests coming, right, then maybe you shouldn't have the TV be coming on because with everything else, with the other problems, there's also a problem of maris ayin, right? Who put it on? But when it's in public, for sure the problem exists. Somebody sees you walking into that pub. They're not going to make a calculation. You know what? I bet he already paid in advance and that he's going to watch the game and he's not going to do anything else over there.
A lot of people in the 67 war and also by the Yom Kippur war, because it always, some of them went into Shabbos.
Yeah.
Then their TVs were on, they didn't put it on, but that was one thing I remember, that part.
Actually, again, we're not going to judge anybody,
You can put
right?
Shabbos to save a life.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So
But I'm not sure putting the TV on is. Unless a person just absolutely has to know what happened in the FA Cup, and if he doesn't, then he's going to.
I'm talking about during a war.
No, look, I tell you like this: in the Gulf War, so they had sirens going off, and the sirens weren't heard everywhere. And so the sirens were being broadcasted over the radio as well, so that everybody should leave their radios on. And the problem was on Shabbat, there was a problem. So they dedicated, here in Israel, a station that was completely silent unless the sirens went off. And we all left our radios on Shabbat, but it's not broadcasting anything. But when the sirens go off, so then, you hear the siren, you hear all the announcements, and you hear the all clear, and then it went silent again.
It's very good. Yeah.
Right? That's like things that happen in Israel that won't happen anywhere else, right? Because it's a Jewish state. So but the truth is that it was a very, very difficult period, but it was a very beautiful time as well. Right? And you've got people who are so concerned that that's what they're doing, dedicating radio stations that they should be silent throughout the whole of Shabbos, only in case there is some kind of a siren. Then it really was a very beautiful idea, that's for sure. But the ruach of Shabbos is something that you need to keep it. It needs to be something which is very intrinsic to your Shabbos observance. I'll give you an example of what's called marit ayin, of doing something which is permissible. When I was a kid, so parav margarine first came out. Like margarine up until then was always dairy. It always mixed together with milk. But all of a sudden they brought out parav margarine. It was a big thing. Flora was one of them. Toma margarine, I think, was the first kosher margarine that came out that was parav. And it's a problem. You're eating a nice meaty meal, right? And somebody brings out what looks like you're right. It looks like a thing of butter, and everybody starts taking it and spreading it on their challah and putting their salami on top of it. And what's going on? So I remember as a kid, the rabbis made an announcement that if you're going to use parav margarine on your Shabbos table, you should bring it in its wrapper. Right, so people should see that it's margarine and it says that it's parav on it, so they shouldn't make. Today we don't have to worry about this because margarine is such a like a normal occurrence that we don't have to be too concerned about it. The truth of the matter is now we need to be concerned about margarine for health reasons and not for halachic reasons. But I guess they coincide because the Torah says you need to look after yourself. So I guess that's also part of it. It's also got a halachic dimension to it. But that's mamish. Where did they learn that from the rabbis? Where did they learn it from? The Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, says that when you cook meat or chicken together with almond milk. If you squeeze almonds, they give off a juice, and the juice is cloudy and white.
Milk.
It's not milk. It's not dairy, but it's called almond milk because it looks like milk.
It's not got any dairy.
It's got no dairy in it whatsoever, and it's got a very, very strong almond taste. If you like almonds, it's fantastic.
So does rice, by the way. Rice milk.
Oh, rice milk. That's right. Yeah, but I guess in the Shulchan Aruch they talk about almonds. If you cook meat or chicken with almonds, so the Shulchan Aruch with almond milk, the Shulchan Aruch says that you should leave almonds on the food when you bring it to the table, that people should know that this is almond milk. Here, maybe, coconut milk, it's the same thing, right? That you should have, I guess, bits of coconut together. If you're cooking something with coconut milk, have bits of coconut together with it in order that people should know. Now, today, in our generation, we're so used to lactose-free milks, all different kinds of milks. It's almond milk and coconut milk and soy milk and you name it. There's a whole series of these things that today I don't think it's necessary today. But you know what? Maybe if you've got people who are coming to your house for Shabbat, for example, who are really not familiar with very much at all, maybe you should be careful just to explain that what they're eating is not meat and milk together, but rather it's rice milk or coconut milk or soy milk or whatever it is. Maybe you should. Good. Okay. So what do we learn from all of this? The spirit of Shabbos is fundamental. It's important. The ruach, right?
Drink
And we-
coconut milk.
Stick with whiskey. I guess that's the moral of the story is stick with whiskey. Okay, good. We're going to stop over here, Mitzvah Hashem. Tomorrow, of course, is the best day of the week because I don't have to come in. And we will meet back here in Mitzvah Hashem, a day off, Erev Shabbos, running around like a headless chicken, backwards and forwards to the makolet and to the supermarket. And, did you get this? Yes, I did. No, I didn't want that. I wanted the other one. I'll go back and get the other one. Why did you get that? Because you just asked for it. No, I meant this one.
Yeah.
Whatever. In Mitzvah Hashem, when you get married, you'll experience this for yourselves. But we'll meet back here in Mitzvah Hashem on Sunday, right? As always, bleary-eyed, hungover, right? Wishing to be anywhere else but here.